She stands there in that famous photograph, white dress billowing in the subway wind, that radiant smile lighting up her face like sunshine breaking through clouds. But if you look closely, really look, you can see something else in those eyes. Something that whispers of loneliness on quiet Sunday afternoons, of questions asked to empty rooms, of a little girl who never quite understood why love always seemed to slip through her fingers like water. The world knew her as Marilyn Monroe, the ultimate symbol of beauty and desire, the woman whose image would outlive presidents and kings. But long before she became the most photographed woman on earth, before the bright lights of Hollywood learned to love her face, before millions of strangers decided who she should be, there lived a child named Norma Jean who spent her nights counting stars through foster home windows and wondering if anyone, anywhere, was looking back. Her name was Norma Jean, though the world would forget that soon. Enough. Born into a world that didn't know what to do with her, too beautiful for comfort, too fragile for fame, too human for the myth she would become. June 1st, 1926, Los Angeles General Hospital. The beginning of a story that would end too soon and echo too long. Her mother Gladys held her for just a moment before the weight of her own fractured mind pulled her away into a darkness that mental institutions couldn't quite heal. Norma Jean's first lesson in love was its absence, the understanding that the people who were supposed to stay sometimes couldn't, no matter how much they wanted to. There's something about a childhood, marked by absence, that never quite leaves you. It settles into your bones like winter cold, making you always a little hungry for warmth, always a little afraid that spring might not come. Norma Jean learned early that mothers could disappear into hospital corridors, that fathers were more myth than man, that home was whatever foster family had room for one more dreaming child. The first foster home was a place where silence lived in every corner, where children were expected to be grateful and invisible. She learned to walk quietly down hallways, to ask for nothing, to make herself small enough that no one would remember she was there. But at night, when the house grew still and everyone else was sleeping, she would press her face against the cold window glass and wonder if her real parents were looking at the same stars, thinking about the daughter they had given away. She would spend hours looking out windows, watching other families through their lit-up kitchen windows, wondering what it felt like to belong somewhere without question. The Bolender family took her first, when she was barely old enough to form memories that would stick. But even then, she understood the difference between being wanted and being taken care of. Ida Bolender was a stern woman who believed that children should be seen and not heard, that too much affection would spoil them. But sometimes, late in the evening when the chores were done and the other children were asleep, Norma Jean would catch her looking with something that might have been tenderness. Those moments never lasted long. Duty always returned, and with it the reminder that love was something you earned, not something you were given freely. Grace McKee would become her guardian later, a woman who saw something special in the growing girl, something that sparkled like stardust when the light hit it just right. Grace worked at the same film lab as Gladys had, and she carried with her the glamour of Hollywood dreams and the sadness of understanding how rarely they came true. She would show Norma Jean magazines with beautiful women on the covers, John Harlow with her platinum hair, Greta Garbo with her mysterious eyes, and whisper that maybe someday, if she believed hard enough, Norma Jean could be one of them. But even kindness came with conditions: be prettier, be better, be someone worth keeping. Grace taught her how to curl her hair, how to apply lipstick without anyone noticing she was wearing it, how to smile in a way that made people want to look at her twice. These weren't gifts exactly. They were tools, weapons in a war she was too young to understand she was fighting. In those quiet moments between households, she discovered something that would both save and destroy her. She could become someone else. Standing before a cracked mirror in a shared bedroom, she would practice smiles, practice walking, practice being the kind of girl that people might want to keep. She didn't know then that she was rehearsing for a performance that would last a lifetime, but children who learn to perform often forget where the performance ends and they begin. School was where she first understood that beauty could be dangerous. The other girls whispered about her behind their hands, called her names that made the teachers blush and look away. But the boys looked at her like she was something they wanted to unwrap, something precious and forbidden. She learned to carry herself differently, to avoid certain hallways, to make herself invisible when the wrong kind of attention felt too heavy to bear. The first time someone noticed her in a way that made her feel dangerous was at Van Nuys High School. She was walking down the hallway, just another teenager in a crowd of teenagers, when she felt the weight of eyes on her back like sunshine on bare skin. Boys stopped talking mid-sentence. Girls stopped walking mid-step. In that moment, she understood that her body carried a power she hadn't asked for, a power that could change the temperature of a room just by entering it. But power without understanding is just another kind of vulnerability. She dropped out before graduation, married Jim Dougherty when she was barely 16 because it seemed like the only escape from a system that had never quite figured out what to do with her. Jim was kind, steady, safe, everything a foster child learns to value. But he was also ordinary in all the ways that made her feel like she was disappearing again, like she was becoming exactly what everyone expected her to be, and nothing more. The war came and changed everything for everyone. But for Norma Jean, it brought something unexpected, a chance to matter. Working at the radioplane munitions factory, assembling drone parts with her steady hands, she felt useful in a way she never had before. For 8 hours a day, she wasn't the foster child or the girl who didn't quite belong. She was a worker, a contributor, someone who mattered. The other women at the factory treated her differently than the girls at school had. There was respect here, camaraderie born of shared purpose. They were all building something together, all part of something larger than themselves. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere not because of what she looked like, but because of what she could do. The camera found her first at the factory where she worked during the war, when she was still just Norma Jean with dreams too big for her circumstances. The photographer, David Conover, was there on assignment for Yank magazine, looking for pretty girls doing their part for the war effort. He said she had something special, something that made the lens fall a little bit in love with her face. She didn't understand what he meant then. She just knew that when people looked at pictures of her, they looked at her differently afterward. That's when she began to disappear, slowly at first, then all at once. The first modeling jobs paid a few dollars here and there, enough to buy nicer clothes, enough to feel like maybe she had found something she was good at. But each photo shoot required her to be a little less Norma Jean and a little more whatever the camera wanted her to be. She learned to arch her back just so, to part her lips in a way that suggested things she wasn't sure she understood, to look at the lens like it was a lover who might leave her if she wasn't perfect enough. The transformation from Norma Jean to Marilyn wasn't like putting on a costume. It was more like watching yourself fade away while someone else takes your place. The blonde hair that wasn't her natural brown, peroxide burns on her scalp that she learned to bear with the same smile she wore for the cameras, the breathy voice that wasn't her real speaking voice. Hours of practice lowering her register until it became as natural as breathing. These weren't additions to who she was. They were replacements. Emmeline Snively at the Blue Book modeling agency saw dollar signs when she looked at the transformed girl who walked into her office in 1945. Here was beauty that could sell everything from toothpaste to dreams. But success in modeling meant becoming even more of what everyone wanted and less of what she actually was. Photo shoots became lessons in erasure, each click of the camera capturing Marilyn while Norma Jean stepped a little further back into the shadows. The early Hollywood days were a blur of screen tests and small roles, of studio executives who looked at her like she was a commodity they were trying to figure out how to market. She learned to laugh at jokes that weren't funny, to pretend she didn't understand innuendos she understood perfectly, to be whatever version of feminine these men found least threatening. Hollywood welcomed Marilyn with open arms and closed hearts. She was what they had been waiting for without knowing it, beauty that didn't threaten, sensuality that felt safe, a woman who could make men feel powerful and women feel superior all at once. But late at night, in her apartment overlooking a city of lights, Norma Jean would sit by the window and wonder if anyone would love the girl she had been before she became the woman everyone wanted. The studios taught her how to walk differently, how to speak differently, how to move her body in ways that made cameras fall in love with her. They put her in acting classes where she learned to cry on command, to laugh with her whole body, to become whoever the script needed her to be. But nobody taught her how to find her way back to herself when the cameras stopped rolling. The movies came gradually, then all at once. Small roles that grew larger, larger roles that grew legendary. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, where she sang about diamonds being a girl's best friend, while understanding that the only thing she really wanted was something money couldn't buy. Some Like It Hot, where she played sweetness and innocence while her own innocence cracked a little more with each take. Directors loved her because she could embody every man's fantasy while remaining just vulnerable enough to seem attainable. They didn't care that she arrived on set shaking with anxiety, that she took 50 takes to feel safe enough to be spontaneous, that she stayed awake nights memorizing lines because she was terrified of disappointing people who had already decided she wasn't smart enough to deserve serious consideration. But there's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with being loved for someone you're pretending to be. Every magazine cover, every premiere, every interview was another layer between her and the world, another step away from the foster child who had dreamed of belonging somewhere. She fell in love the way some people fall off cliffs, completely, desperately, hoping someone would catch her before she hit the ground. First Jim Dougherty, when she was barely 16 and marriage seemed like a way to escape the foster system forever. Then Joe DiMaggio, the baseball legend who saw her beauty and wanted to protect it from a world that seemed bent on consuming it. Joe loved her with the fierce possessiveness of a man who had learned to guard his treasures carefully. He wanted to take her away from Hollywood, away from the cameras and the crowds, away from everything that made her feel valuable. But taking her away from the thing that gave her worth felt like another kind of disappearing. Their fights became legendary, not because they were particularly dramatic, but because they represented an impossible equation. How do you love someone who exists in two different people? How do you hold on to someone who has trained themselves to be whatever others need them to be? Joe fell in love with Marilyn's beauty but wanted Norma Jean's devotion, never quite understanding that the two couldn't exist in the same space. Then came Arthur Miller, the serious playwright with kind eyes and a belief that intelligence was the most beautiful thing about any woman. Arthur saw past Marilyn's image to the hungry mind underneath, the woman who read voraciously, who asked questions that revealed a sharp intelligence the studios worked hard to hide. With Arthur, she thought she could become someone worthy of being taken seriously. Their marriage was supposed to be the meeting of beauty and brilliance, Hollywood glamour and intellectual substance. But even Arthur, who loved her mind as much as her beauty, couldn't quite love all the broken pieces that came with both. The men in her life found themselves loving Marilyn's image while searching desperately for Norma Jean, never quite understanding that she was searching for her too. There were nights when she would call friends at 3 a.m, not because she had anything particular to say, but because the silence in her bedroom felt too much like the silence of her childhood. She would talk about wanting a baby, about wanting a little house with flowers in the garden, about wanting to wake up as herself instead of as someone the world expected her to be. But the world had made its choice about who she was supposed to be, and it wasn't interested in revisions. The pills started as a way to sleep, then became a way to wake up, then became a way to exist somewhere between the two. They promised what nothing else could, a place where Norma Jean and Marilyn could rest in the same body without fighting for space. But promises made by small white tablets are the kind that break you even as they keep themselves. She tried again and again to find her way back to something real. She studied acting seriously with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio, hoping that learning to become other characters might teach her how to be herself again. The other students watched her work with a mixture of admiration and confusion. Here was the most famous actress in the world, struggling with the same basic questions they all faced. She read books voraciously, Dostoevsky and James Joyce, poetry that spoke to the parts of her that magazines never photographed. She hungered for knowledge, surrounded herself with intellectuals who saw beyond the curve of her hip and the breathy laugh. But the world had already decided what she was worth, and it wasn't interested in depth. It wanted the surface to stay bright and uncomplicated. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had become the most recognizable woman in the world, yet felt invisible. Millions knew her face, her walk, her voice, but no one knew what she thought about during long car rides, or what made her laugh when she wasn't performing happiness, or how much she missed having a mother to call when the world felt too heavy to carry alone. In her final year, friends would later say, "There were moments when you could see Norma Jean flickering behind Marilyn's eyes like candlelight in wind. She would talk about wanting to do serious films, about wanting to write, about wanting to disappear somewhere quiet where she could remember who she had been before she became who everyone needed her to be. She spoke of wanting to marry again, maybe to someone who had never seen her movies and didn't care about her fame. She dreamed of adopting children, of giving some other foster child the kind of home she had never had. She talked about learning to paint, about traveling to places where no one would recognize her face, about becoming ordinary in all the ways that had once terrified her. But some transformations are too complete to undo. Some performances run so deep they become the person. And some little girls who learn too early how to be whatever others need them to be never quite find their way back to their own hearts. The morning they found her, the newspaper headlines screamed about the death of Marilyn Monroe, icon, legend, symbol of an era. But somewhere in that quiet bedroom, it was Norma Jean who had finally stopped searching for a way home. She left behind a legacy that would outlive everyone who knew her, images that would hang in museums and bedrooms and teenagers' lockers for decades to come. But she also left behind questions that have no answers about the cost of becoming what the world wants you to be, about the loneliness of being loved for your shadow instead of your substance, about what happens to the child you once were when you become someone else so completely that you forget your own name. There's a photograph of her that most people have never seen, taken during a break in filming when she didn't know the camera was watching. In it, she's sitting alone, looking out a window, and her face holds an expression that would be impossible to fake. It's the look of someone remembering something they've lost, or maybe hoping for something they've never had. That's the photograph that tells the real story. Not the subway grate, not the diamonds and evening gowns, not the breathy happy birthday song. Just a woman, alone with her thoughts, wearing the face that belonged to her before the world decided who she should be. They say she lives forever now in the images and the films and the memory of a generation that grew up watching her light up silver screens. And maybe that's true. Maybe there's a kind of immortality in becoming so much larger than life that you never really die. But sometimes, late at night, when the city gets quiet, you have to wonder about the foster child with dreams too big for her circumstances, who learned to become someone else so well that she forgot the way back to herself. You have to wonder if, somewhere beyond all the myth and legend, Norma Jean finally found the thing she was looking for all along, a place where she could belong without having to become someone else first. The woman behind Marilyn Monroe was never a mystery to solve or a tragedy to mourn. She was simply someone who loved too hard, hoped too much, and gave so completely of herself that there was nothing left when the performance finally ended. And maybe that's the truest thing anyone can say about a life lived in the light of other people's dreams, that it was human and fragile and real, even when the world insisted it was anything but. The subway grate photograph still makes people smile, and maybe that's enough. Maybe being remembered for bringing joy to strangers is its own kind of beautiful ending. But somewhere in the space between the image and the woman, between Marilyn and Norma Jean, there's a story that never quite gets told. It's the story of what it costs to be everything to everyone else and nothing to yourself. The story of how sometimes the brightest lights cast the deepest shadows, the story of a little girl who grew up to become the world's most famous woman, but never quite learned how to be herself. That story doesn't have an ending because some questions don't have answers, but it has a beginning, and that beginning was a child who looked out windows and wondered what it would feel like to belong somewhere without having to change who you were first. Maybe that's the real legacy, not the icon or the tragedy, but the reminder that everyone you see, no matter how bright they shine, carries inside them the child they once were, still hoping, still searching, still dreaming of home. The cameras captured her image for eternity, but they never quite captured the soul behind it, the part of her that remained Norma Jean, no matter how completely Marilyn took over the world. In quiet moments between takes, when the makeup was touched up and the lights were adjusted, you could sometimes catch a glimpse of her real self. A fleeting expression, a private smile, a moment of genuine laughter that had nothing to do with the performance. Those were the moments that mattered most, because they proved that somewhere inside the myth, a real person still lived and breathed and hoped for something that no amount of fame could provide. She wanted to be known, not just recognized. She wanted to be loved, not just desired. She wanted to belong somewhere without having to become someone else first. The world gave her everything except the one thing she needed most, the permission to be herself. In the end, that may be the saddest part of her story. Not that she died too young or that her talent was never fully appreciated, but that she spent her entire life searching for something that was always there, buried underneath all the layers of who everyone else needed her to be. She was just a little girl from Los Angeles who grew up to become the most famous woman in the world, but never quite learned how to come home to herself. Her story ended too soon, but it echoes still in every person who has ever felt like they had to choose between being authentic and being loved, between staying true to themselves and giving others what they want. The woman behind Marilyn Monroe was both ordinary and extraordinary, ordinary in her need for love and belonging, extraordinary in the price she paid for fame. She reminds us that behind every image, every performance, every perfect moment captured on film, there is a human being with the same fundamental needs we all share: to be seen, to be known, to be loved for who we really are. And perhaps that's the most important lesson her life teaches us, that fame and beauty and all the things the world tells us we should want can never fill the empty spaces that only authentic love and genuine belonging can heal. She had everything the world said should make her happy. Yet she spent her life searching for the very things that money and fame can't buy. Her legacy isn't just in the movies or photographs or myth that grew around her name. It's in the reminder that we are all more than what we appear to be, that behind every public face is a private heart with its own joys and sorrows, hopes and fears. She showed us that the cost of living for others' expectations can be the loss of your own true self. In the end, the woman behind Marilyn Monroe was simply a human being who wanted what we all want: to matter, to belong, to be cherished for who we really are rather than who we pretend to be. Her story doesn't end with her death. It continues in every person who chooses authenticity over approval. The little girl who once counted stars through foster home windows grew up to become a star herself. But she never stopped looking for the thing she was searching for: a place to belong, a love that wouldn't ask her to be anyone other than exactly who she was.